All right, welcome everyone. This is the very special international meeting of Humanity for Peace. This is an emergency forum titled No More War Crimes, Economic Development, Not Depopulation. And we'll have a couple of special guests joining us today, namely Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Ray McGovern. We'll also have a special showing of a documentary, which is excellent, titled 815 Hiroshima, From Father to Daughter. But to start off our meeting, we wanted to bring you something beautiful. And this is from Mozart's Requiem, which was done as the Humanity for Peace chorus on August 6th. This was a concert which was done after a really successful international demonstration at the UN. And this was on the day that Hiroshima was bombed by a nuclear bomb. And this was an expression of this can never happen again. This must never happen again. And we need to recognize what nuclear war really means and honor those who were lost in this very tragic and quite frankly disgusting bombing that happened. So with that, I'd like to bring up the portion of it called the Kyrie of Mozart's Requiem from that concert on August 6th. This was conducted by a very famous conductor, Turkish conductor, Gürer Akal, who I'm probably totally butchering his name, but he's a really fantastic, sweet, and beautiful person. And I'm very grateful that he offered his conducting skills for this really beautiful concert. And with that, I think this sets a really great tone for what we're going to be doing today at this meeting. For those who are joining us, I see we have a bunch more who have joined. Please make sure to select interpretation if you need it. We have English, Spanish, German, French, and Italian. We will have people from all over the world speaking today. And if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. There's a raise hand option. and we'll open up the chat during the Q&A. I will now pass it over to my co-host, Dennis Speed of the Schiller Institute. Thank you.
Okay, Anastasia, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am.
Coming through. Okay, very good. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And as we begin today, we want to recognize that this past weekend has marked a pivotal and tragic event in American and world history, and that was the assassination of the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, 60 years ago, by interests which have been being discussed extensively. And they originate in the city of London, and they originate in the United States itself, not with a foreign power. The Schiller Institute, which participated in the Requiem performance you just saw from this past August, 10 years ago, organized Requiem performances in commemoration of Kennedy's assassination at that time. But I'd like to pose something to you in this context that I'd like you to think about throughout the entirety of the proceedings that we're about to engage in. And this is a reflection on the Kennedy assassination from the former Attorney General of the United States, Ramsey Clark. And he was talking about a visit that he had paid to the Kennedy Center in the aftermath of the assassination. And he said this, he said, there are sayings written around the Kennedy Center, little mottos, so to speak, quotations, carved above the marble above the colonnades when you walk in. And on the back side, toward the Potomac, there's one in particular, and it's a quote from President Kennedy that says, "I look forward to the day when America is no longer afraid of grace and beauty." And then Ramsey Clark says, "And I thought immediately when Kennedy was shot that was why he was shot. We are afraid of grace and beauty." I think you should want to think about that and why we would have started as we did. And the matter we are about to take up is truly ugly, truly disgusting, but at the same time has to be fully confronted. I want to call people's attention to the fact that on November 5th, there was an article that came out in Politico magazine, which was titled, "Israel Minister Suspended After Calling Nuking Gaza an Option." And here was the particular quote. Israel's Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu was suspended indefinitely after he said in an interview that dropping a nuclear bomb on the Gaza Strip was, quote, one of the possibilities. Now, it would be supremely irresponsible to not take that statement seriously, because already the bombs dropped so far on Gaza since October 7th, well over 30,000 tons detonated by the Israeli Defense Forces exceed the bomb tonnage dropped in the most lethal air raids of the Second World War, including Hamburg, Dresden, and the Tokyo firebombing. War crimes are afoot. This past week, foreign ministers from Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, Turkey, Indonesia, Nigeria, as well as the Secretary General of the League of Arab States and the ambassador of Qatar went out and they visited with China, Russia, the UK, and Paris, all of them permanent members of the UN Security Council. In fact, the French President Macron did meet with them. The others were meetings which were done with the respective foreign ministers of China, Russia, and UK. But the delegation, which came from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, decided to skip a visit to the United States. China was the first destination. And in August, China had brokered a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this was regarded in the United States, this was talked about by an organization called the United States Institute of Peace. They said that this was, quote, a diplomatic win for China as it increasingly seeks to present an alternative vision to the US-led global order. Well, the question is, what is that global order? Is it the order that we are seeing right now in Gaza? Is that what it is? Is it what we're seeing in the West Bank? Is what we're seeing in terms of the NATO war with Ukraine? Clearly, the challenge to that world order is one that should be made by people of goodwill all over the world. The many people have been involved in the process of organizing today's event, but the person who had initiated the conception of putting together the International Peace Coalition organization in particular was Helga Sepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's always my honor to introduce her, and here she is to speak and be the keynote for our presentation. All right, so Helga.
Well, first let me greet all of you wherever you may be watching and listening to this program, which I think is very, very urgent, because we are engaged in the effort to increase the mobilization of the International Peace Coalition and actually make it grow until we have brought the world away from the present course. Because it is very clear that there is a very great danger that a continuation of the present geopolitical policies will lead to a catastrophe much worse, but like the movie we are going to show in a little while, namely a thermonuclear war which would end the life on Earth. If not in the short term, the danger for sure is there, in the medium or long term, because if the present idea that we are engaged in a fight between two blocks, on the one side NATO, on the other side the growing BRICS combination of states, it will lead with absolute certainty to the extinction of civilization. And only an in-depth mobilization of the population, most important in the United States, but also naturally in Europe and in all the other countries of the global south, is important to escalate until we have the force to implement the solutions which do exist. Now, one extremely important component of this fight is the fight about, will the truth be told about all of these conflicts, or will it be a narrative which is tailored in such a way to give the legitimization to this war policy? Now, let me start with the two regional wars which are going on, but let me say from the beginning that as important the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine are for all the people involved, the Russians, the Ukrainians, the NATO troops, the Israeli forces, the Palestinians, we should absolutely keep in mind that these two conflicts or wars, who have their very specific historic histories, nevertheless right now are simply pawns in the larger game, the fight between these two systems. Now, let me start with a few words about the situation in Gaza. We have now, I think, the second day of the truce in Gaza, which has been forced basically on Israel, because Netanyahu had originally said that there would be absolutely no negotiation until Hamas is completely destroyed and all hostages are freed. Obviously, it was a combination of the worldwide mobilizations and demonstrations in all the Islamic countries, but also in many cities in the United States, in the streets of Europe, and naturally what the Chinese media called the great power influence, meaning the meeting between President Xi Jinping and Biden in San Francisco. So, and a lot of diplomatic activities. Dennis already mentioned the delegations of the OIC and the Arab League going to China, to Moscow, to London, Paris, and some of them going to Washington. All of that is definitely an influence, but the danger is that these 4 days will be over on Tuesday, and there is the extreme big danger that the war will continue, and that in a situation where it is unbelievable what is happening. The good thing, if there is anything good in a nightmare of this dimension is that the world public could see with their own eyes at least glimpses of the degree of the destruction in Gaza, of the enormous plight of the Palestinians. 2.3 million people in cold weather with rain, no housing, almost no housing left, no food, no water, no medical supply, and that going on since many weeks. Now people have been pushed to the south. Many of them are gathering in the near the Fatah crossing, and it is an unbelievable situation, which has been called by many human rights organizations ethnic cleansing, genocide, that Palestine, or Gaza rather, is being turned into complete wasteland, which is the intention, because it should make it impossible for people to live there, at least no Palestinians. So it is now also becoming clear that the whole narrative that the Al-Shifa hospital was really the pretext, or was the place where the headquarters of Hamas was supposed to be in a tunnel system underneath, and that Hamas was using the Palestinian population as a human shield, has turned out to be a lie. And there are also reports now that the IDF knew that the actual headquarters of Hamas was in another place, 8.5 kilometers distant. So, this is basically a situation where, the truth is coming out. And one important statement was made by Antonio Guterres, the General Secretary of the United Nations, who said in a very emotional speech that the attack by Hamas on October 7th did not happen in a vacuum, which caused a complete hysterical reaction by the backers of Israel, by the United States, in places like Germany. Why was the reaction so hysterical? Because it punctured the Israeli narrative that basically this was all a sudden attack. Now, the diplomatic mission, which was mentioned, accomplished a very important thing, because you have two countries, China, which made the proposal that an immediate two-state solution for the Palestinians must be put on the agenda in the context of a more general Middle East peace conference. Now, we are mobilizing today, and in these days of the truth, to get as many forces as possible to back up this idea that only a peace conference can really resolve the situation. Now, when the delegation arrived in Moscow, apparently there also Russia announced that they are preparing a new security architecture for the entire Middle East. Now, that is something what my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, already proposed in 1975, when he proposed an oasis plan, meaning, to have an economic development, greening the deserts, but, the oasis idea being a symbol that, the oasis is man-made, and you can make the deserts green with modern technologies. You can have industry, agriculture, infrastructure, to have a real economic development plan for all of Southwest Asia as the only way how you can get peace. Now, this is important, and it's important that many people are picking up this idea, which we are publishing also and have published already, because, the situation in the United States, and everybody knows that Israel would never do what they're doing without full backing of the United States. Biden is facing re-election, and he has to worry about the fact that there is a vast majority of the population for a ceasefire in the United States, in Gaza, and there is now a growing number of cities who have passed resolutions, Seattle, Atlanta, Detroit, and many others. And therefore, I can only appeal to the people watching from the United States, but also from Europe, to go into the streets and fight for the Middle East Peace Conference and Architecture and the Oasis Plan, and confront your politicians with it, so that we get a growing mobilization to put this on the table. Now, let me quickly mention the second war, the Ukraine. Now, in the United States in particular, and here and there also in Europe, even the mainstream media are admitting that Ukraine lost the war, that the US has not allocated additional money in their budget, so that the supply of arms is becoming a smaller trickle, and that, you know, Germany, which is now claiming that they want to double the funding for sending weapons to Ukraine, however, is confronted with a massive bankruptcy of their economy. So it is doubtful that this can really go through the way some warmongers are planning it. And naturally, you know, the story here also, like in Gaza on the October 6th, the story that there was an unprovoked war is really not to be upheld any longer. And there is a general recognition that it was the broken promises of NATO not to expand to the east by 1 inch, which caused, you know, the prehistory of the Ukraine war, that it was the orange coup attempted coup in 2004, that it was for sure the Western instigated and financed Maidan putsch. And there's an incredible effort right now to rewrite the history by basically saying that Russia started the war in 2014 by leaving out completely the fact that it was a fascist coup, to which Russia reacted with the developments in the Crimea and then later the Donbass. Now, Merkel, Hollande, and Poroshenko have all admitted that they did only negotiate, or not even negotiate, only pretend to be in favor of the Minsk agreement, to give the Ukrainians more time to be trained up to a level of NATO level, and you know that therefore also the prehistory of what happened on the 24th of February 22 has to be taken into account. Now, to understand all of this in the right context, one has to look at the larger strategic setting. Now, let me brief you about something which, even if it pertains to the specifics of the German situation, I think it gives the whole story away in a very useful way for the international audience to reflect about it. Because recently, the defense minister of Germany, Boris Pistorius, in a speech made, maybe it was a slip of the tongue, maybe it was intended, he said that the key task was to make Germany war ready. Now, nowadays, there is a lot of talk about why Germany has to back up Israel without any question asked because of the Holocaust. Now, we should remind ourselves of the German history when the German defense minister is again saying Germany must be made war ready. You know, it's not just Israel where we have to think about it. We have to think about the German history. And I'm appealing to everybody. They should call people in Germany and tell them, get off this course. Well, what is this all about? I started to look in the strategic discussion, what is behind this Pistorius remark. And there is a broad discussion among the think tanks and among certain so-called analysts and, moderators and talk shows, which basically, is best expressed in a paper published by the German Council of Foreign Relations, the DGAP, in a policy brief, which basically says that there needs to be a quantum leap in the mentality and the whole armament policy of Germany, that there must be an increase in the military production, a real war economy. There must be a massive increase in the number of soldiers serving in the Bundeswehr. And thirdly, there must be an absolute mentality shift in the attitude of the population to this militarization of Germany, because Germany must develop as quickly as possible the most powerful and most combative modern army of NATO in Europe. And, so then they propose, that, not only military production has to be massively beefed up. There is no money for that because everything else will be cut. All the social costs, healthcare, the education, infrastructure, everything will be cut except this military build-up is intended. Now, how do you get a mentality change in the population, which, the young people don't know history so well anymore, but in the older generations, there are still some people who know what it meant that Dresden was bombed to the ground in the firestorm, that Cologne was flat, many other cities were rubble fields. They have a memory. If they didn't experience it themselves, they know it from the history and the stories of their grandparents who would tell them. So there is a need, to get the population to accept that war should be fought on German ground again. Now, what this paper then basically says is to get such a mentality change, everybody from 18 to 65 should be, basically forced to serve for 1 year until 35 in the military. And if you are 35 to 65, you have to serve 1 year in any function which is an auxiliary function to this effort. And the debate about this has to go into all pores of society, into the clubs, into the sport clubs, into the schools, into the universities, into the state parliaments, city council, and so forth. Just every single entity in which social life is taking place have to be accustomed to this future militarization of Germany, because people have to be trained to accept sometimes in the future that through German villages and towns, again, tanks are driving to the east. And, even if there is then combat, that blood, people injured will come full of blood, and they have to accept to live with these pictures again. That is all in this paper. And then one of the authors, a guy called Christian Mölling, never heard of him before and probably should be forgotten as soon as possible as well again. He just had a 22-minute live interview in the top evening TV show ZDF Heute. ZDF is the second channel today, in which he develops at great length, 20 minutes are a long time, what is really at stake. First, he assumes, or basically charges, that the real goal of Russia is, a coming war with NATO. No proof. And, let me just say this in parentheses. The British also have put out a new white paper on China, in which they basically say the same thing, that, in Mölling's case, Russia is, or NATO supposedly says Russia is the biggest threat to all of NATO. And this British paper says the same thing about China. The reality is, it is not true. Let me just interject this here. I mean, you should ask yourself, why is it that the global South countries, who are by far the global majority, have a completely different attitude to Russia and China? They regard these two countries as friends who are helping them to overcome their underdevelopment and end colonialism after 600 years for the first time. So just do not fall for these narratives, because they have a geopolitical intention. So what does he say? Russia, will, when the Ukraine war ends, he basically doesn't want to touch the fact that the war was lost in Ukraine for NATO, as all these other wars, the Vietnam War, not NATO, but the US, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, all these wars were lost. So anyway, he doesn't discuss it. So he says, when the Ukraine war ends, then Russia will build up its full military strength, And since it needs probably 6 to 10 years to do so, NATO must immediately start this arms race, given the fact that Russia is already one step ahead, or maybe 2 or 3. And the Russian population is more willing to give up the living standard for the military than in the West. Therefore, one has to be prepared, because sooner or later Russia will invade the Baltics. Look at the trouble, he says, already at the Finnish border, not mentioning that the Finns just joined NATO in the 6th NATO expansion to the east, prolonging the Russia-NATO border by 1,300 kilometers. Really moving like it's like if Russia and China would move to the Mexican-American border. He doesn't mention that at all. And then he basically says this is why NATO must build up everything massively, quantity, because we have seen there was not enough ammunition now. And basically Germany will become the hub for this deployment. And he says the war started in 2014. So here goes the story about the unprovoked war. And the population has to accept, therefore, we have to build up a military industrial landscape. Then the moderator asks him, so you think the coming conflict between BRICS and NATO is inevitable and this will happen? He says, yes, we have to make the decision. Will we go for risk or security? We have to choose security. The danger is that Russia will try to divide the NATO countries and then grab some countries. And if we then throw them to them like food for animals, these countries he is talking about, zum Fraß vorwerfen is the German very nasty formulation. Then it's too late and the West will lose. Now, this is obviously just a reflection, because the German Council on Foreign Relations, not by accident, has a similarity to the U.S. Not New York Council of Foreign Relations, and they are basically the sibling of this institution, and that is clearly behind those forces who think that Russia has to be ruined, as Baerbock has said many times, that China must be contained, which is impossible because China already is the strongest economic power and bypassed the United States in actual physical economic power. So this is a cause of absolute disaster, and it will end up like Hiroshima if we don't change. Now, how do we change this? First of all, we have to counter this narrative that Russia is such a monster intending to take over the world, because it's not true. It is not true that China is trying to replace the imperial United States, because China has no such intention. Both of these countries want to have a system as it is represented in the BRICS, which is based on sovereignty, respect for the other social system, non-interference in the internal affairs, basically the UN Charter and the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And I think that the only way how we can prevent this present constellation of ending up in a catastrophe is we have to convince the populations of Europe and of the United States that we have to cooperate with the BRICS plus the global majority of the world, and that we have to move as quickly as possible to set up a new international security and development architecture, which takes into account the security and development interests of every single country on the planet. And that we, basically, I wrote 10 principles, which could be the beginning of a discussion, how such an architecture could look like. And I think this is the most urgent task, that we tell people there is an alternative to military build-up and confrontation, and that, like in the Peace of Westphalia, it is possible to come up with a set of principles which allow for the interest of every country to be taken care of. And that is the only way how we are going to get out of this crisis. So I appeal to you, we have to have a new financial system, because, the present transatlantic financial system is in a very advanced state of its demise. We are sitting on a powder keg of 4 quadrillion outstanding derivatives. US banks alone are sitting on several hundred billion of unrealized losses, which are a powder keg which can explode any moment. So we need a new financial architecture, a new credit system, and that should then be the basis to finance the overcoming of poverty, of underdevelopment, of building a healthcare system in every country on the planet, of developing infrastructure as a precondition for industrialization and agriculture in every country on the planet. And we should join hands and forces to overcome the relics of colonialism in the Southern Hemisphere and the countries of the global South. If we put this on the table, it is a way out of this situation. Nobody is losing, except maybe some speculators in the military-industrial complex. But, we can also transform these military-industrial complexes into useful production of physical goods, which are, for the common good of the people. So I think that is the program, and we have to get an earnest discussion about it, because I think that without such an intervention, and I'm appealing in particular to forces in the global South to help us to get the people in Europe and in the United States to understand that the countries of the global South are not the enemy, but that we need to build a world in which we all can live. I mean, this is the big moral test of humanity. Can we, as the only intelligent, creative species, give ourselves an order which allows the long-term survival of us all? Thank you.
Thank you, Helga. And if you've just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's emergency forum, No More War Crimes, Economic Development, Not Depopulation. You've just heard Helga Sepp-LaRouche, the founder and head of the Schiller Institute. You can find out more about Helga and what she has to say on the Schiller Institute YouTube channel, where she does a weekly webcast with Harley Schlanger, as well as on her website at schillerinstitute.com. Our next speaker is Ray McGovern, co-founder of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, a CIA analyst for 27 years, and a proud thorn in the side of duplicity and injustice. Ray, glad you're here.
Thank you, Dennis. Can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
Okay, good. Well, let me start simply by congratulating Helga for that good roundup of where we are today, sad as it is. I'd like to focus in on Gaza. I'd like to focus in on the well-known fact, that without U.S. support, Israel could not do what it's doing in Gaza, and that what it's doing in Gaza is a textbook case of genocide. Now, what do I mean by U.S. support? About 20 years ago, when Bibi Netanyahu was in the living room of one of his constituents, he decided to lay it all out there, and so he said, "Turn that video machine off." The fellow forgot. I just had to do something on my screen here. He forgot, and so we know exactly what Bibi Netanyahu said. He said, the Americans, let me quote, I transcribed it. The Americans can be very easily moved in the right direction. 80% of the Americans support us. It's absurd. End quote. Whoa. Well, is it still the case that 80% of the Americans support genocide? We have to make clear that it is not. That is no longer even close to 80%, despite the Zionist influence in the administration, in the Congress, and in the media. It's a tall hill to climb, but we're doing it, okay? I've been at demonstrations here in a small town called Raleigh, North Carolina. Thousands of people, most of them with only a tenuous connection with Palestine, but a big, deep connection with justice. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is tell you of an experience that Veterans for Peace, a group that I'm proud to belong to, experienced when we went to the West Bank, the occupied West Bank in Palestine 6 years ago. I'm going to show a couple of clips. One is taken in the, pretty much begins in the living room of a man named Bassem Tahini. Now his wife, his daughter is Ahmed Tamini, and she's more prominent and more popular and more well known because of what she did in the face of the Israeli soldiers. I mention that because what follows this presentation, or follows our program here, is a film about a father-daughter relationship. It seems to me the same between Bassem and Ahed. Now, so we're in Bassem's, 9 of us, 9 delegation from Veterans for Peace. We're in the living room there, and the discussion turns to what the protesters against occupation, and specifically what the young children suffer, and what the very brave women do to stop it. So may we have that first clip now, Dave, to show this, and then I'll talk a little bit. It's only 3 minutes, so if you fall asleep, you're going to miss the whole clip. Dave, can you show that?
Thank you. Thank you.
Beautiful, wonderful. And you are a hero, a great hero. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. That's right.
I saw the soldier. Was he trying to take your son?
We have a demonstration, and then we come to the hill here, and then the soldiers was hiding around us. He was a broken hand because they shot him before 2 days of this by a rubber bullet. And they said he throws stones. How he throws stones with a broken hand?
How old?
He was 11 years old.
They can arrest you at 11.
Yeah, they can. Yes.
Very careful. Stop it. He's got a gun. Stop.
They catch Mahmoud, and they took him for 5 months in jail, 7 months in jail, and this boy, where you see, yeah, we have the youngest prisoners now is 13 years old. They give him 3 years in jail.
13.
No, 13. Yes.
3 years in jail.
Yeah.
You were a big rock star when you were on tour because of this video.
The price is high. When you lose part of your cousin and family, it's not easy to say it's famous or not. It's important to be famous or not. Yeah, the worst issue that we are still under occupation. We need a lot of time to reach our goal, and mean a lot of suffering and mean a lot of losing. For that, the future is not easy for us.
May I be heard again? Yes. All right. Well, that was Bassem Tamimi. I asked him after seeing that video, I said, Bassem, your sons, one of them's in prison, another one has had his leg shot and it has to limp for the rest of his life. Your brother-in-law was killed with a rifle shot just outside your door here. How can you persuade or how can you allow your children to keep this up? And he looked at me like I was from Mars or maybe Saturn, far away. And he said, Ray, you asking me to stop my children from fighting for freedom, freedom from occupation? And I swallowed. Footnote here, Bassem is now in jail. He was arrested last week. So is Ahed, his daughter. And we'll see more of them in the next clip, which will show what happened after we had a demonstration, that is simply walking down the road and stopping at a trail, and the settlers came. And they beat up the women who are with us. And they beat up the women press who were with us. And then they went after the small guys. They never touched Matthew Ho, who was about 6'4". Now, it was really a terrific example of how cowardly these people were. And as we climbed back up the hill, I heard shots that I hadn't heard in around 40 years. And I said, are those rifle shots? And the Iraqi and Afghan veterans who were with us, yeah, Ray, get your head down, for God's sake. Those are rifles whooshing over us. What you're about to see is after that event, the Israeli army was not satisfied with defending the settlers who came armed. Each of them had a sidearm. Some of them had rifles, okay? But they came up and pursued the little kids into Nabi Saleh, the name of the town where we were staying with the Tamimi family. Okay, so the next clip will show that, and then we'll have just a few more comments. May we have the next clip, David?
But it's a good experience for you to come and see and touch. Me, the meaning of the occupation. It's not a word. It's a life.
It's a life. It is.
This generation, how they deal.
How they deal.
Yeah.
These are the bravest. These here are the bravest people I've ever seen. These are the bravest people I've ever seen. Your children are the bravest people I've ever seen.
We won again.
Bravest people.
All right. Where you go, man?
Well, when we were putting this together, we thought it was really important for the group to get a really good sense of the nonviolent resistance and the persistence and the dedication and the long-term steadfastness of the Palestinians in keeping to this nonviolent resistance in the face of really brutal occupation, in the face of a lot of guns, in the face of tear gas, in the face of racism, their refusal to be drawn into that, and how they manage every day to keep getting up and doing this work when the forces of occupation and oppression are coming down on them.
So what you've just seen and what has been going on the West Bank for decades is what I would call slow genocide. They go in every week to some village and they pluck out some young kid and they put him in jail. 11 years old, I asked Bassem, they can arrest and put in jail 11-year-old? Yeah, they can. And the 13-year-old got 3 years. That's what's going on here. That's what we have to stop. The overt genocide actively advertised by Israeli leaders That is so blatant that it's up to us to do more than just write articles as I do, participate in demonstrations as I do. We have to do more. The reality is captured by this headline in a recent article in consortiumnews.com. Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Joe Biden know that if they lose the American people, they are both in serious trouble. Well, they're losing the American people. I don't think 80% of the American people support Netanyahu in what he's doing now. It's a textbook case of genocide. It's against the Geneva Convention. It's so manifest, and it appears on our TV screen. And the president apparently will say on Tuesday, go ahead, defeat Hamas. And if that means killing another 5,000 Palestinian children, well, you know. So what we have to do is something more than make speeches. It's something more than what we've been doing. We need to organize. And that means that if you only have two friends who feel as strongly as you do, you get together with them and you figure out what you can do, because we can all do something. Now, as an example of a laudable writing that came out just a day or two ago, after 7 weeks of slaughter in Gaza, one author, he wrote a letter to Biden, okay? And he said, your unqualified support for what the Israeli leaders have announced openly as their determination to slaughter unlimited numbers of Palestinian civilians. This constitutes the crime of all crimes defined in international law, the crime of genocide. It makes every American complicit to the extent that you do not, that we do not, that I do not directly and actively, I say actively, oppose such policies. I'm going to quote my favorite rabbi, Abraham Heschel, who said, when such crimes take place, few are responsible, few are guilty, but all, A-L-L, are responsible. Indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. So, we have examples of very brave, very nonviolent Palestinian citizens on the West Bank where slow genocide is taking place. We have examples in Gaza of fast genocide, with half the population already routed from their homes, moving to the South Gaza. So what are we going to do? Well, we need to get out there, folks, and before Tuesday, if you can, all right? And you know, if to those who think you can't change things, well, LBJ was going to do even worse in Vietnam. Now, let's see, was there a genocide in Vietnam? McNamara, the Secretary of Defense at the time, said that 3 million Vietnamese died in that war. 6 million in the Holocaust genocide. Does it have to be 6 million? I'm not trying to be funny here. 3 million is quite enough. And after World War II, the law was written to include part of an ethnic group, okay? 3 million Vietnamese, 2 million in Gaza. Is that genocide? Of course it's genocide under international law. Now, my point is simply this. We stopped the Vietnam War. It was later than we hoped, but we stopped it. How did we stop it? We shouted, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Real loud. We know now from revealed documents that had an effect. That prevented LBJ from going north into North Vietnam and getting China almost certainly getting China involved. So what do we need to do today? Well, it occurred to me we have to have a new slogan. And here's what I'd suggest. Ho, ho, Sleepy Joe, genocide has got to go. Everybody, ho, ho, Sleepy Joe, genocide has got to go. If we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. Bibi Netanyahu cannot do it without the support of the American people. He's probably depending on American people just watching TV and we're cheering for their favorite football team. We're not going to do that this time. We're going to say, not hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids you killed today. We're going to say, ho, ho, Sleepy Joe, genocide. It's got to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. If you've just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's emergency forum, No More War Crimes, Economic Development, Not Depopulation. You've just heard Ray McGovern, co-founder of Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, also a member of Veterans for Peace. And you can find more of Ray McGovern on his website at raymcgovern.com, also on social media at the Twitter X handle at Ray McGovern. Our next speaker is Vanessa Beeley. Vanessa is an independent journalist and photographer who's worked extensively in the Middle East, on the ground in Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and Palestine, while also covering the conflict in Yemen since 2015. So Vanessa?
Hi, thank you so much for, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're coming in fine.
Okay. It was really impressive to listen to all the speakers so far. I'm not going to claim to have any big revolutionary solutions to what is happening, but what I can do maybe is to bring a perspective from on the ground in the global south. I've been living in Damascus for almost 5 years now, working here for 7 years, witnessing, of course, the neo-colonialist project to overthrow the Syrian government and to destabilize Syria, partition Syria. And now, of course, we're seeing the genocide, which I don't think has actually really stopped since 1948, since the Nakba. It's just had peaks and troughs, but it's been what I sometimes call a trickle genocide, an ongoing ethnic cleansing and land grab. Of course, the most well-known being in 1967, when the West Bank and Gaza was effectively annexed, and the Golan territories that belong to Syria and are recognized as Syrian territories, but are still occupied by the Zionist entity. So coming to Gaza to give an idea of the devastation, 36,000 injured, 20,000 dead, according to a Euromed Monitor report today, and that includes 8,100 children. It's very hard to say that number without taking a sharp intake of breath. 8,100 children dead. Many others, of course, still buried under the rubble after Israel has bombed the civil defense units, the paramedics, and destroyed the equipment that they need in order to dig bodies out of the rubble. And of course, we're seeing now civilians during the 4-day ceasefire, although in the north, the ceasefire only lasts from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. In the south, there is allegedly a full ceasefire, although there are reports of Israeli drones being overhead in the south even now. 1.5 million displaced. That's more than half the population of Gaza in a strip of land that is 40 kilometers by 12 kilometers. I was there in 2012 during the Israeli aggression in November of that year. What has happened in the last 6 weeks, I can't even imagine, even though I lived under the aggression for 1 week in 2012, I can't imagine what the Gazan people were enduring during the last 6 weeks. And as you've mentioned, the sheer tonnage of explosives that have been dropped on Gaza in 6 weeks outstrips those that were used, I believe, in Hiroshima. 46,000 homes were destroyed, 234,000 are damaged, 88 mosques destroyed, and 3 churches damaged. This is a very important point to make, because while the West and Israel portray the resistance very much as an Islamist front, comparing them, of course, to ISIS, although the irony of this is that ISIS is in reality a proxy of the US alliance, including Israel in Syria, and has been triggered since October the 7th to carry out intensive and vicious attacks on Syrian Arab army and civilian positions, trying to reclaim the territory around the east of Homs, the gas pipelines basically that they lost in 2015 when Russia intervened and pushed ISIS back out of the central areas of Syria. So whilst Israel and the US are comparing Hamas to ISIS, they are effectively supporting, promoting, arming and equipping ISIS and weaponizing them inside Syria. So that is an ultimate irony for me. The reality, of course, is that the resistance goes way beyond Hamas. Every single person in Gaza and in the West Bank, as Ray so eloquently pointed out, is resistant to the apartheid oppressive regime and occupation, the collective punishment of the Palestinian people, the ongoing ethnic cleansing, the mass detention, particularly of children, the sexual abuse of children in prisons, the torture of prisoners, particularly that has been ongoing since the 7th of October and has resulted in the deaths of prisoners and the ongoing torture of prisoners, despite the release of some of them in exchange for the Israeli hostages that were being held in relative comfort and were actually being protected by the resistance factions against the Israeli Hannibal doctrine, which is effectively to destroy their own hostages. We're hearing now, of course, the truth coming out even about the 7th of October, the fact that it was Israeli Apache helicopters and tanks that did the greatest amount of damage against Israeli civilians. I believe the helicopters were attacking more than 360 targets over a period of 4 hours. And the footage that was released of the aftermath demonstrate that the deaths and the incineration of bodies could not have been caused by the resistance factions. It must have been caused by the Apache helicopters. Coming back to the resistance factions, the point that I want to make is that you have 17 resistance factions alone in Gaza. You have multiple others in the West Bank. There is no Hamas in West Bank, and yet the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian in the West Bank has been ongoing also and increasing since the 7th of October with the destruction of infrastructure, mosques, schools, the mass detention. I think it's more than 3,000 that have been arrested. I could be wrong on that. I'm quoting from, again, figures from Euromed Monitor. Disappeared bodies from the north of Gaza. And again, Euromed Monitor is accusing the Israelis of potential organ theft from these disappeared bodies. Mass graves in Gaza of bodies that are now being found decomposed on the roads of northern Gaza after the Israelis left injured Gazans to bleed out and to die on the roads and prevented paramedics or family members going to get the bodies. So quite extraordinary scenes that we're seeing. And yes, I don't think it's something that any of us should look back on later on in life and believe that we were complicit through our silence. We all have a responsibility to speak out against the horrendous scenes that we're seeing, not on an hourly basis, but on a minute by minute basis. So I wanted to focus basically on what the situation is here in the Middle East. We know that Hezbollah has been very much occupying the Israeli forces in the north while containing the conflict, not allowing it to escalate, because it's well known in the region, particularly in Syria and Lebanon and in Iran, that the agenda of the West, of the US, and I'm talking bipartisan, I'm not only talking Joe Biden, I will come on to Kennedy Jr.'s statement in a minute, which demonstrates that Democrat and Republicans are for escalation. So what the resistance factions in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon in particular are trying to do are trying to contain the conflict while helping or assisting the Palestinian resistance factions to the best of their ability. So Hezbollah, as I said, have been occupying a large number of Israeli forces and brigades in the north, preventing them, of course, going and entering the battle on the ground in Gaza. Syria itself has opened up the front in southern Syria for Palestinian factions to target the Israeli settlements in the Golan territories. That is ongoing. And of course, Syria has been receiving increased bombardment from Israel as a result. Just this afternoon, the Damascus civilian airport was bombed again and put out of action. It hadn't been operating for a few weeks since the previous Israeli attack on both Aleppo and Damascus airport. Aleppo is still out of operation. Damascus is again out of operation after today's bombing around 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock this afternoon. So a southern front has been opened up on Syrian territory to target the Israeli settlements in the Golan. There have been direct confrontations between Syrian Arab Army and US occupation forces, particularly in the northeast. 15 missiles were fired by the Syrian Arab Army directly at the Konoko illegal base that is occupying the Konoko gas field. 6 American personnel were killed in that attack. They were killed in the command center within the base itself. And the Syrian Arab Army has been engaging directly with US forces. That's a development, that's a significant development. At the same time, what they've been doing is expanding the area for the resistance from Iraq, the Islamic resistance, to effectively target the US bases in Iraq and inside Syria. And I believe there's around now 56 American forces have been killed in these attacks. At the same time, of course, we've seen Yemen declare the Red Sea a no-go area for Israeli shipping. We've seen the seizure of 1 Israeli ship already. And there are reports over the last 2 days that another ship has been taken by the National Salvation Coalition government in Sana'a. President Assad at the Emergency Arab Summit alongside Palestine, Algeria, Tunisia, Iraq, Lebanon, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Libya, and Yemen put forward a proposal which included 1, preventing the use of US bases and allied military bases in Arab countries to supply Israel with weapons and ammunition. 2, freezing Arab diplomatic, economic, security, and military relations with Israel. 3, threatening to use oil and Arab economic capabilities to apply pressure to end the aggression. 4, prevent Israeli civil aviation access to Arab airspace. 5, forming an Arab ministerial committee that will travel immediately to New York, Washington, Brussels, Geneva, London, and Paris to stop the Israeli aggression. Sadly, the countries that voted against it and effectively vetoed it were Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and Mauritania. But I wanted to point out what President Assad said during his speech, which was probably one of the most powerful speeches at the summit, and I'll quote from him now. By our will only, by the overwhelming popular public opinion in our countries, with the new reality imposed by the Palestinian resistance in our region, we possess those tools. Let us use them and let us take advantage of the global transformation that has opened for us political doors that have been closed for decades, so that we can enter through them and change the equations and let the precious souls who rose in Palestine be a rewarding price for achieving what we were unable to do in the past and what we must accomplish in the present and in the future. I think this is a very important statement because what Assad, I think, is referring to, of course, is the global south pivot to the east towards China and Russia and the emerging power of Russia and China and partnership with the global south, which of course is anathema to the US alliance that is looking only for a unipolar world with them having supremacy over the world resources. And that's what brings me on to a recent statement that Robert Kennedy Jr. made regarding Israel. And I think this is key to what we're fighting against, because there is no compassion, even from Kennedy, for the Israeli people or for the Palestinian people. Helga, you referred to what is happening. It's these people being used as pawns. While I don't want to denigrate the historical context of what is happening in Palestine, I agree that for the ruling predator class, people of any nation are dispensable. And I think Kennedy's statement makes that very clear, for me at least. So he said, Israel is critical, and the reason it's critical is because it's a bulwark for us in the Middle East. It is almost like having an aircraft carrier in the Middle East. It's our oldest ally. It's been our ally for 75 years. It's been an incredible ally for us in terms of the technology exchange, and building the Iron Dome, which we have paid a lot for, has taught us enormously about how to defend ourselves against missile attack. That military expenditure, 75%, goes to US companies under the agreement, under the MOU. If you look at what's happening in the Middle East now, the closest allies to Iran are Russia and China. Iran also controls all of Venezuela's oil. Hezbollah is in Venezuela. I haven't verified that claim. They have propped up the Maduro regime, and so they control that oil supply. BRICS, Saudi Arabia is now joining BRICS, so those countries will control 90% of the oil in our world. If Israel disappears, the vacuum in the Middle East, Israel is our ambassador, our beachhead in the Middle East. It gives us ears and eyes in the Middle East. It gives us intelligence, the capacity to influence affairs in the Middle East. If Israel disappeared, Russia and China would be controlling the Middle East and would control 90% of the world's oil supply, and that would be cataclysmic for US national security. For me, this statement is on a par to Trump saying the only reason they had troops in Syria was to take the oil. This is pure, naked honesty from Kennedy. As despicable as it is, this is honest. And so I think, finally, I just want to end on the question of the nuclear threat. And you mentioned the Heritage Minister talking about nuking Gaza. But I also want to mention the fact that there are another kind of underground tunnels in the Negev desert of a much more dangerous kind. First built in 1958 and just about 53 miles from Gaza, there's a complex now called the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center, where at least 80 thermonuclear weapons have been developed. This facility underwent a major renovation just 2 years ago. And to this day, writes Joshua Frank, Israel has never openly admitted possessing such weaponry, and yet has consistently refused to allow inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency to visit this secretive site. And I finally want to just finish with the Colin Powell moments that we've seen during the genocide of Palestine by Israel since October the 7th. First of all, Theodore Herzog claimed and held up the instruction manual that Hamas had, a chemical weapon instruction manual from Al-Qaeda. Interesting again, because Israel provided weapons for and hospital treatment for Al-Qaeda in Syria. And then his second claim was that an Arabian or an Arabic Mein Kampf had been found that was also in the possession of Hamas. But on a more serious note, I do feel that there is a very high risk of there being an orchestrated false flag event, potentially in the US, to escalate events in the region and effectively long-term to take us to war with Iran, which of course was predicted by General Wesley Clark. So I think we are at a very, very dangerous tipping point. I think the Middle Eastern regional resistance axis countries are well aware of that and are trying to manage the conflict the best they can. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Vanessa, for what you had to say there. If you're just joining us, this is our emergency forum. No more war crimes, economic development, not depopulation. You've just heard Vanessa Beeley, an independent journalist and photographer. You can find more about her current work on her Substack at beeley.substack.com. beeley.substack.com. Now, we are going to have a Q&A period in which we can raise some questions. Let me just say the following. We've only got about 30 minutes, about 35 minutes till we go to the film. And what we're going to do is have people in the Q&A. We have a few people, and we'll go to that. And we will encourage, if you write questions, we'll get them to the speakers so that they can answer them if we can't get to all the questions. First thing I want to do is ask if there is a response from Helga at this point to what you've heard. And also, I want to give Ray, after Helga, the prerogative if he has something to say, and then go right into questions. People should go to the Q&A section there for questions. So, Helga? Okay, she's not on right now. Ray, you have anything you'd like to say at this point?
No, I don't, Dennis.
Okay, well, what we can do is we've had a couple of people with their hands up here. There's a few exactly. Let me see. And I'm going to start us off. Actually, Anastasia, do you have anything that you need to say at this point in the event? We have any announcements I haven't thought of or any business that people should be aware of?
Sure. Yeah, if you'd like to speak, please select the raise your hand option. We'll try to get to as many people as possible, and then we'll move on to the documentary, which I'll make another announcement about. I'll also post, because we'll have a number of statements and things, I'll post those in the chat here. You can also, if you don't want to speak, if you're a little bit shy, you can choose to type in your question in the Q&A option also on the bottom of your screen.
Okay, so I'm going to get us started with the first question, and we'll probably alternate here because I know we both have statements will indicate something, at least acknowledge that people have written various statements, because I think it's important. But I think our first person is Martha Rollins. I think you have to unmute, and let's see if we can see you as well.
I think there might have been a mistake because I didn't have an actual question. I apologize.
Okay, no problem. Okay, we'll mute you again. And I'll go, actually, I'm going to do the first paragraph from the statement that we have from Khadija Lang, who is a doctor who writes, greeting fellow peace lovers. She's also a Muslim, I want to point out, and she operates out of California. She is the head of a medical association there. Greetings, fellow peace lovers. We can all take a brief exhale as we celebrate the small victory that together we have achieved in the form of a short, temporary pause in the horrific famine, disease, heartbreak, death, and destruction, the thousands of innocent women, children, elders, and civilians that the world has witnessed in the Judeo-Christian Holy Land over the last 2 months. She goes on to describe some few other things. She talks about her own medical work and her visits to certain of the areas there. I'm not going to go through that. We will post her statement, and there are several others, and we'll do the same thing. Read a couple of sentences and acknowledge them. Okay, the next person I see is Manukar. Is that your name? I'm sorry if I butchered it, but if you would like to unmute and say something, go ahead. not hearing him.
Hello, can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
All right. Hi, I say hello to you from Afghanistan. That people are here love to hear about war, but we want to talk about peace and seconds ahead, not always talking about the past. And I give you this opportunity. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about the beautiful planet that we have, and we focus on having a green planet. And let's focus on seconds ahead, talking about peace and happiness amongst all of us.
Okay. Thank you
I
for
really
that.
appreciate. I have been in 144 countries, and even if I had a piece of bread in each country, I cannot speak against anyone. I love all of them. Australia was my second home, India my third home, Switzerland my first home after Persia, and I am glad that I've shared with blacks in Africa, with the whites in everywhere in Europe, and I love all of you, and I give you this beautiful news that the month ahead would be the best month of the planet, and everything will work out well.
Well, thank you. Let's see if Helga may have a response at all to that. Is she back?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just had a technical problem. I think we should indeed discuss, how we can install optimism in the people by, discussing the Oasis plan and to discuss, how basically through economic development, the whole situation can be turned around, and if that becomes the unifying initiative of everybody, I think it will have an impact, because I think the world situation at large is reaching such a crisis point, where the idea that you can't do anything, this will be replaced by a crisis moment in which, if you put a solution on the table, this can become a reality. And I think right now there are so many people in the global South countries who are absolutely determined to overcome underdevelopment, that is the trend of the time. The idea to replace the present order of geopolitical conflict with an order where countries are peacefully living together, working to the advantage of each other in a mutual interest way. That is the idea of the time, which can be implemented. So my suggestion would be that we really come out of this meeting with a complete commitment to take the Oasis plan, to take the idea of a new security and development architecture, and really start a mobilization, have universities, think tanks, conduct meetings about that we absolutely take away the discussion from war and bring the discussion to, how can we actually make a peace order? And I'm appealing to all participants, that in every place where you may be, that should be made a subject of discussions, and then we cross-feed that around the world. And I think in that way we can defeat seemingly all dominating media control and replace it with a discussion in the interest of the people.
Okay, Anastasia, I'm going back to you.
Thank you, Helga. Yeah, I want to read just another statement that we have coming in from another leader, and I'll just read the first part of it and I'll post the rest in the chat. This is from Reverend Terry Strong. She writes, "Peace that surpasses all understanding. If all the 8 billion minds in the world were gathered to come to an understanding concerning world peace, the level would pale in comparison to the peace God bestows upon those who love him and are committed to him. His peace is greater than any plan man can devise. His peace is greater than any secular coalition can formulate. His peace is better than the entire world can offer. His peace offers a measure that surpasses that of all the world of psychology and psychiatry. While man offers a false sense of peace, calling for the absence of war, weakness, struggle, violence, strife, confusion, anxiety, and worry, God's peace is present in the midst of these human dilemmas. God's peace is unwavering and gives spiritual guidance when those troubles happen in life. God's peace is faithful and dependable through all our downsettings and uprisings. God's peace offers wisdom for confusion, strength for weakness, calm for anxiety, restraint for war and violence, and confidence for worry and strife. God's peace offers a straight path for our crooked places and times of struggle. So I'll include the full statement in the chat, but we'll have a number of these statements from various religious leaders across the political spectrum who are offering this stance for peace and across political and religious different religions. So we'll go to the next question. Let's see. I see we have, just in the order that we have here, we have someone named Daniel Mirial. I'll call on you next. Are you there, Daniel? Just allowing you to speak there.
Hello.
Hi, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm from South Sudan in East Africa. Yeah, those are my names, Daniel Marial Renkudum. Yes, we know what you are talking about here is how to stop the world into going into a nuclear war that will be so devastating to both the instigators of the war and the entire population of the globe. What can we do? We have seen and on several occasions, powerful countries like United States and its European satellites have tried all means of monopolizing everything in the world, trying to make the world reflect its image from their preach of civil rights in their libertarian manner up to this. So what can we do as the citizens of the world, of the global citizens, to ensure that we stop this? We know United States, like what it is doing now in Gaza, it is because of it that why Israel is taking that stand to massacre civilians in Gaza. If United States was not standing with Israel, Israel cannot do that. What can we do to ensure that America pays for its? I'm saying America as a government, not the people, because there are very many innocent people there in the United States. But the government, those who are leading them, what can we do for them to pay for their crimes? And what can we do also to prevent them from plunging the war into a nuclear war?
I see Ray's hand is up, Anastasia.
Yeah, somebody, Helga or Ray, if you have, if you want to answer that.
Well, I think I've mentioned that Americans, in the first instance, have to make sure that we no longer enable, and I use the word advisedly, we are enabling Israel to do genocide. That's, it's bad enough to attack Iraq and do the most consequential international crime of aggression. But to enable genocide is not a close second. It's on a par with that, okay? Now, two small things, not one small thing, and that is, I want to correct the record. The Holy Land is the Holy Land, not because it's Jewish, not because it's Judeo-Christian, it's Judeo-Christian Muslim, okay? Abrahamic, that's big, okay? Next thing I want to do is just compliment the organizers for inviting Vanessa to be with us. Her contribution has been really, really helpful. I want to ask her a question, if I may, and that is, she talked about the surrounding countries surrounding Israel, trying to manage this, trying not to provoke a wider war. As we all know, some within the Biden administration would very much like to see a war with Iran, and if it comes to that, a war with Russia. Yeah. So what I want to ask Vanessa is, at what point do you think that the Muslim countries surrounding Israel will not be able to restrain their populations, will not be able to try to manage this thing, but will enter the fray with active participation by their armed forces or by their proxies? Vanessa, if you could address that, you're the best person I could possibly ask that question to, and that's why I'm asking you.
Unmute, please, Vanessa. Yeah.
Yeah, my apologies, the electricity has just gone. One of the disadvantages of having US occupation of Syrian resources. We have very limited fuel and electricity supply. Yeah, that's a good question, Ray. I think as regards, I think, for example, with Jordan, I think the biggest problem for Jordan, of course, they're kind of playing both ends against the middle. They are effectively a British vassal state even now. And they are definitely, they're offering air defense for Israel while trying to appease a very large Palestinian diaspora population that is really going crazy to cross the border and to join the fight. And I think for Jordan, that's going to be a real issue if the genocide continues. And I think this is the tipping point. I mean, Netanyahu wrote a personal article for the Jerusalem Post, I think, in the last 24 hours. And what he's basically said is that the genocide will continue. Because, of course, they're using this trope that they have to eliminate Hamas. Hamas are the barbarians and so on. And we know what this means is eliminating every single Palestinian from the Palestinian territories, right? Hamas is just an excuse, a justification for doing so. And so I don't think this is going to stop. Now, Nasrallah has also been very clear that the red line is the ultimate ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza into the Sinai. So I think there you have a very clear red line from Nasrallah that is not going to be allowed. And actually Hezbollah put out one of their kind of PR videos, I think it was only about a few days ago, where they're actually shown advancing on Al-Quds. Because of course, what is this all about? It's about the Zionist intention to destroy Al-Aqsa or Al-Quds and to build Temple Mount, right? So I think there's the red line for Hezbollah. For Syria, I think Syria has the intention, I mean, it's dealing with hostile occupations on almost every front. In the northwest with Al-Qaeda, which is a US asset, in the northeast with direct US occupation of resources and the Kurdish separatists, in the south, a recent separatist movement that's been backed by Israel and the US. And of course, the US is occupying part of the southeastern flank of Syria with Al-Tanf military base, where it's training thousands of ISIS and assorted extremist brigades. So I think what Syria intends to do, while of course it's battling, because what the US is doing, its response to the Syrian Arab Army escalation has actually been quite muted. Biden's been quite careful. He's bombed mostly empty ground. He hasn't sort of done the shock and awe that one might expect when American personnel are actually dying in these attacks. But what he's done is to trigger ISIS. So it's ISIS that is now carrying out the attacks on the Syrian Arab Army positions on behalf of the US. Russia is bombing the ISIS positions and the ISIS headquarters, getting precariously close to Al-Tanf, which is the US allied base. So I think in Syria, to some degree, it's going to be easier to maintain some sort of status quo. But what I am genuinely worried about is this idea of a false flag. which is going to be blamed on some nefarious CIA created intelligence organization, potentially Hamas, potentially another offshoot of Hamas, which will then lead to an escalation in the bombing campaign against Syria, against Lebanon, and potentially against Iraq, because you have the kind of the fusion of all of the resistance groups that have some affiliation to Iran under the Islamic resistance banner. And of course, they've been targeting the US bases both in Iraq and in Syria and causing serious damage. So I think that's where my fear lies. I think if it is up to the countries themselves, they can control the escalation internally. Hezbollah has its red lines, and that's the final ethnic cleansing of Gaza into the Sinai. If it reaches that point, I think you'll see Hezbollah get involved, as Nasrallah has intimated. Syria will contain it, but will open up the fronts for the Palestinian resistance factions to engage with Israel in the illegally annexed Golan territories. And there are other resistance factions that are appearing kind of out of nowhere. There was a recent, it's the Al Arabiya Jazeera, so the Arabian island, that has also been targeting Israel on behalf of the Palestinian factions. Yemen, of course, I think there is a chance of escalation against Yemen, because Yemen has taken a very strong stance against Israel. The US is building up its naval forces around Yemen in the Red Sea. And I think you may next see US engagement against Yemen. If I have to predict anything, I think Yemen will be targeted. But so I think there's two things. There's potential for false flag, and there's potential for escalation against Yemen and for Hezbollah to enter the conflict if Israel pushes it to the point of completely ethnically cleansing Gaza. That's just my reading of the situation, but I'd love to hear your opinion as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, before I go back to Anastasia, Helga, you want to have anything you'd like to say, given what you've heard? Or should we just continue?
French, you need to switch over to the French line. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So Anastasia, Helga, do you wanted to say something, or you did not? Not clear.
Yes, I wanted to make a short comment. I mean, I think Vanessa is obviously very much close to the situation in Southwest Asia, but I tend to always think that if you are in a sandbox where the chess pieces are all set, and the British Empire and other colonial powers have been using this region for a very long time, for the great game, for, the Sykes-Picot agreement, the drawing of borders. I mean, all of that is known and it's being played. So for me, always the question is, how do you somehow get out of the box? How do you take an approach, where you bring in a new element? And, since I think that this is only part of the strategic picture, I tried to make the point earlier that both the situation in the so-called Middle East and Ukraine, while they have specific characteristics and histories and features, they are part of this larger game. And the larger game is the wrong idea that there is necessarily an unsurmountable conflict between the countries of the global North, NATO, the US, the so-called West, and Russia and China in particular, the rise of China being the foremost economic foe, and Russia becoming again a world player in terms of military power. And I think that is the real bottleneck, or the real critical point which we have to crack, because as long as, and I think Putin had said it at a certain point, that if they would not have found Ukraine, they would have found another place or reason to get into the confrontation with Russia. And I think the key question for me, I mean, I can only say that the only way how I can think that we diffuse the situation is that we have to bring, in one way or another, the voice of the global south much more in the picture. Because when President Nehru and Sukarno at the Bandung conference were talking about the danger of nuclear war, they said that this is an issue which concerns the countries of the global south as much as those of the north. They may be killed a few days or weeks later, but eventually, if there is nuclear war, it will kill everybody. And I know the difficulties in the BRICS are, that there are different countries, they have different agendas. It's not a homogeneous group. But in light of what we are looking at, which is really the picture which we are going to confront with the movie going to be shown shortly, that is something which concerns all of humanity. And I think we must make a real effort that the countries of the global south, in light of this danger, speak out more loudly. Because if they would say crystal clear that the only way there will be a cooperation with Europe, with the United States, is that they have to agree to a new international system, a new paradigm of international relations. And if the countries, the BRICS plus all the countries who have applied for BRICS membership, which is altogether almost 50 countries, if they would get together and make such a message and say, we demand that the Chinese proposal for a Middle East peace conference and the Russian proposal for a new security architecture for the Middle East is being followed immediately, and we all put our weight behind that, and they would then appeal to the peace movement, which is fragmented, but nevertheless it is there. There are many people and organizations fighting for peace, and they would appeal for them so that the global south and the peace movement of the global north would join hands and demand these solutions in a very fast way. I think this could tilt the balance.
Okay, Anastasia, back to you.
All right, thank you, Helga. So I have one more statement and then we'll go to Diane Sayre. So we have a statement from Pastor Calling Nuking from St. Paul Lutheran Church in Dearborn, Michigan. She writes, from Romans 12:17 to 18. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. I share this verse for a sustaining ceasefire and to work for peace with justice together, with and on behalf of our siblings everywhere. Thank you. And then I'd like to go to Diane Sayre. I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Just a couple of points I wanted to make. One is I concur with Vanessa Beasley on this question of the danger of a false flag, because we have an election cycle. The question of who is president of the United States is extremely important, which is also why I'm running for US Senate in New York, not having the resources to run for president, but a campaign for presidential policy. On January 3rd, 2001, Lyndon LaRouche made a warning, because people may remember that 2000 election, the hanging Chads, Bush and Gore, etc. And he said, Bush doesn't have a strong mandate. Therefore, he will need, and Ashcroft was being appointed, he will need a Reichstag fire kind of event to give himself the power, as in the Notverordnung in Germany after the Reichstag fire, to in effect rule by decree. And 9 months later, we had the 9/11 attacks, the truth behind which we have never bothered to find out. I do think that's real. I also was reflecting on something Mr. LaRouche said, I believe it was during the late 90s, during the horrific genocide going on between Rwanda, Burundi, then Zaire, Hutu, Tutsi, etc. And he made the point about the seeming weakness of the people caught up in this horror to fight would be the strength to oppose it. And as people may know, a couple days ago, Bibi Netanyahu gave a rug-chewing fit press conference in response to the press conference held by President El-Sisi of Egypt and the prime ministers of Spain and Belgium, saying that now would be the time to recognize the Palestinian state. And Netanyahu, in response, talked about the great historian he admires, Will Durant, who said that history does not favor Jesus Christ over Genghis Khan. History favors the strong. Well, there are many hundreds of millions of followers of Christ, and apparently only one follower of Genghis Khan, namely Bibi Netanyahu. And I think that it is this weakness, in a sense, weakness of the children of Palestine that is having an extremely profound impact on the American people, whereas barring a qualified president or leading anti-war presidential candidate, the American people do have a great power, and that power comes from this place in the conscience, which clearly Bibi Netanyahu does not understand. And therefore, I also concur with Ray about the urgency of the action of the American people in the streets to be heard to put a stop to this. And I agree that it is possible. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you, Diane. We're coming up on time, as everybody can see. It's 12:53, so we got 7 minutes left. And what I just want to say is there are a lot of questions. We do want people to write those questions, and we will get these to the respective panelists to answer you. We want to make it very clear that the whole point of the meeting is that we are deploying, we're organizing, and we value not only your being here, we value being in touch and getting everything clarified so we can move forward, especially today and tomorrow, given what is likely to happen on Tuesday. I just wanted to state that we have to be right on time with the movie at 1, which is 7 minutes from now. Sorry about that. So I believe we have Bob Cushing. Is he next, Anastasia? And if so, can you deal with that?
Let me see, make sure I added him in here as a panelist, or if we lost him. Oh, there we go. Bob, I see you're on there. I think we added you as a panelist, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, I really appreciate what Diane Sarah just said, and the larger setting that Vanessa brought in about the 17 resistance factions in the West Bank, but particularly what Bibi has said about who is technical things. Okay, I see. What Bibi said about the strength that he's speaking about, he speaks about the strength that is the monster or the beast. Overwhelmingly, I believe we who are participating in this conversation have Christian or believers' sensibilities. And so, as Diane said so well, the conscience is being stirred of people for the innocence, the genocide that's going on. So I believe that what we need to talk about is the security. Every time we use that word, like a lot of people are choosing the security of the beast, that of brute strength. Right now, we're trying to stir the soul of the nation to see that security has an has so much to do with the security of these children who are being slaughtered and the security of all the children in every nation. And so I think that right now we're in the dark still about a lot of things. Vanessa pointed out these different factions that are going on. I was confused about how ISIS fit in the picture and so on. Right now, there's a lot of confusion, but there are war crimes going on, and we're trying to focus on some of them and make some conscientious decisions. So I appreciate what's going on right now in this conversation, because the prophetic dimension, the dimension of conscience, is arising to the surface now, so that we can speak about the geopolitical intention of ourselves and not cast aspersions on Russia's or China's geopolitical intentions. Right now, every nation is trying to clarify that from the point of view of its heart values, its conscience. So I think we're trying to choose security, not Bibi's kind of security, of brute strength, but of a nonviolent kind, a spiritual kind, that would genuinely secure all the nations involved. So thank you, Vanessa, for broadening the picture, and thank you, Diane, for bringing in the prophetic and conscientious dimension.
Okay, we've only got 3 minutes, and I'd like to do the following. I want to allow at least Helga, maybe we can get to you, even Ray. I think we can get to you to just say anything in summary. There are a lot of questions, a lot of other statements, and we will be having, say, discussion period after the movie. So if you want to stay with us, that's fine. Let me go first to Helga, if you have something you'd like to say at this point.
But I think that, the lesson of the Peace of Westphalia negotiations, which ended 150 years of religious war in Europe, was the recognition that you have to take into account the interest of the other. And that is always the interest of every other. For the Middle East situation, that would mean that you have to find a solution which allows for the interest of every single nation, every single grouping. And that can only mean that you have to have an economic development, peace through development, because, the Palestinian average annual income is, I think, below $1,000, or maybe that's an older figure, but it's extremely low. And, if you look at the region as a whole, it is mostly desert. So I think the idea of creating new fresh water, of developing an oasis plan of real economic infrastructure, which is eminently possible, given the fact that the relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia had been reconciled. There is a need for economic development in Yemen. We all saw this horrible movie by the World Food Program, Hunger Ward. The children are dying in the incubation machines in the hospitals because of a lack of food. To overcome this horrendous poverty through development could really be the one thing which could, lead to a peace solution.
Thank you, Helga. Ray, you've got 30 seconds. You want to take it?
Sure. Benchmarks here. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Westphalia, 1648. UN, 1945. UN Resolution, 1967. Unanimous. Israel has to withdraw from the occupied territories. That resolution was November 22nd, 1967. It needs to be enforced. For God's sake, it was a war of aggression that Israel waged in 1967. Its former prime minister has acknowledged that. We have to enforce it, and there's an increasing majority in the UN, not only the Security Council, but the General Assembly, that would support us. It's on the books. make sure Israel withdraws from the occupied territories and does not bomb Gazans into oblivion.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you. Anastasia?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This has been a really wonderful discussion. I have one more very short statement I just want to read from Imam Elahi of the Islamic House of Wisdom in Dearborn, Michigan. He sends his greetings to the event. He wished he could be here, but I'm sorry, the interpretation. And he says that, please pass my regards to all. And now that the pause in Gaza is happening, they're killing people in Jenin and other West Bank areas. Let's pray for them.
Lynn Siegel, if you can unmute, we will be able to hear you.
Yeah, I just like to hear from some people. There's 300 people here apparently. There's no participations icon to find out. But if there's so many people here, there must be some that have some ideas besides me on how to end this thing. It just seems, I mean, I heard Vanessa saying that the United States supported Al-Qaeda in Syria. And is the US now supporting ISIL in Syria? Because and did not 1967, the USS Liberty, did it not happen? Is that just in my imagination? What don't I get about what's wrong with this situation? For 75 years. And Resolution 181 and 242 completely violated. No sense of law in the world. It's just unthinkable to me. Am I the only one that feels that way? I just don't get it. I'm just waiting for the atom bomb to hit, and appreciating the beautiful snow and the sunshine that I'm seeing, because in an instant, I'm going to be just like her dad.
Well, let me just say the following. Ray was a CIA analyst for 27 years and may have a view of various of the things that you said. So I'm going to ask him if he has an answer.
May I be heard?
Yes.
Okay. All I'd say is that I think was the function of this meeting today. There were a lot of ideas adduced. Vanessa was terrific. She gave you the answers to those questions you have about ISIL and Al-Qaeda. The question we need to address is what to do now, like what to do like right now, and what we need to do in the foreseeable future. And for me, I'm focused on Tuesday. If we don't get out in the street today, tomorrow, and Monday, there's going to be, after a humanitarian pause, by the way, the humanitarian pause, and then the genocide will start again. That's on us, folks, because it's the United States of America that enables, that arms and funds this genocide. Can you believe it? You better believe it, because that's what we're doing, and that's what we have to stop.
Well, Ray, no offense, but I think that a ceasefire is a distraction from doing the right thing instantly, which is reparations, huge reparations, and a contiguous state for Palestine, not divided up between Golan Heights, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. That's a recipe for disaster, and it was planned from the start. And so we're talking 75 years, and I hear you saying, like, we need to be out in the streets now. Well, we've been out in the streets for 75 years, and it's not okay. And it needs to, the root cause needs to be changed. A pause. You know what time is? Who knows what time is? Nobody knows what time is. It's just a figment of our imagination. But I can tell you, the people that are in Gaza, her dad, time was endless. The longest night of his life was that torturous night. I feel all that. It's not that everybody on this call doesn't feel all that too. I'm just saying, there really needs to be something that's actually tangibly changeable. And a ceasefire and a pause and arguments over all of that is just a huge waste of time.
Well, I will say the following. I hear what you're saying, and let me just point out something which maybe if Helga thinks this is all right. Normally I wouldn't do this, but we are at the end, and I will say a few things about that because I happen to have some very specific and strong ideas about exactly what should be done and exactly what people have to face if they really want to do something. Now, again, the chair is never supposed to do that, so I have to. But I'm going to step out of that role for a minute and say the following to you.
Dennis, you're just a person too.
Yeah, okay. So let me just say what I got. First of all, there's a series of nations that are out there right now organizing something to get out from under the Anglo-American control. And the actions that are being proposed that we are watching right now at this moment in Gaza, these are actions that have something is happening on a broader stage. Now, normally, you did say something about people being out in the street, but let me just point something out. The United States only allowed what happened, and it was a manipulation, of course, around Thanksgiving, but it did that only because of the thousands and tens of thousands of people that have been out in the streets in the United States. Right now, there are actions going on basically continually. I got a text message a minute ago that the Manhattan Bridge is blocked by Jewish Voice for Peace right now. Okay, there are 1,000 people out there. And what is happening, and the thing to understand is people often, and it's understandable why, so let me sort of abbreviate myself. It's not a question of simple protest. It's a question of you must think as a government. You cannot think as protesters. You have to think as a government. What that means is you're conducting an actual nonviolent war. You have to think in terms of war, but nonviolently. And I'm not saying that facetiously or without understanding something about it. This is something that many of us as individuals, and there's all kinds of people who have all kinds of organizing credentials. But right now, China, which is at the head of the United Nations Security Council's discussions, is able to put forward certain proposals. They've been put forward. The reason that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation started in China was to put pressure on the United States, and that was successful. So they started in China, then went to Russia, then went to England, then went to France. And this is a group of countries. So I'm not going to try to take more time here, but I want to point out, because it would take too long, but the action of today, like this thing that you're on today, we planned this about 10 days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, because we said, okay, what's going to happen at the end of the month is that everything is going to accelerate. We didn't know anything that there was going to be a ceasefire, but we knew that the acceleration was going to be such that if we did the meeting in the middle of the so-called Thanksgiving weekend, we would probably be right on time to cause a further escalation. So this meeting is a catalytic meeting. There's not a meeting in which all the solutions will come up here, because it's an actual war that we're conducting, but non-violently. It's a higher level of warfare. And it's something that's not, it may sound rhetorical what I'm saying, but this involves intelligence. It involves what's called operations. It involves reconnaissance. It involves all those things that people talk about with weapons, but you can do it with your mind, and you can do it together with people. And so what you just had from Dr. Mikamu, for example, what she went through is a weapon that you now have that you may not have had, many people didn't have before she said what she said. Ray has done the same. Helga has done the same. And I'm going to stop there because of time, and also because there are many other things. I'm going to ask, I see so many people that have questions, and I guess the best thing is we're going to have to ask you to write a lot of these. We may try one or two more, but I want to now just ask that, first of all, by the way, if either Kynan or Jose have anything else to say, about actual intervention, what we actually have done. That might be useful at this moment. And we will show at the conclusion, sort of to take us out, our ceasefire now, which is a video we made. It's a song that we did, so people see that. But Helga, I'm going to ask that you might, at this point, sort of say, respond and do a kind of a summary, and then maybe we'll, well, actually, excuse me, if Heiner or let's say Jose, if you have something, please do that right now, and then we'll go to Helga.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just keep this really brief because I think, because of time reasons and stuff, I just want to say this. There are actions happening every day. What happened at the Manhattan Bridge was organized in a way in which it looks spontaneous. And there is especially if you live in a major city, something is happening every day. All you have to do is look, and it's not that hard to do so. If you are in a small city or a town and you don't think there's anything going on, organize something yourself. Take a picture of yourself outside of your city hall, outside of your congressman's office, holding up a sign that says stop the ethnic cleansing or whatever else you think appropriate, and post it to social media. I will share it. I have 76,000 followers. Other people will share it too. And you will have a greater profound effect. More people will see that sign and a picture of you standing in front of wherever you are on social media and around the world than more people who live in your town. So those are just some of the things I'll just throw in there, and then we can go right to Helga.
Okay. And then just intervene. And that's something that you can see plenty of video about that up on our sites. So Helga?
Well, I think that the need to have this emergency Middle East peace conference where a two-state solution is an integral part of a comprehensive approach for the entire region. That is the way how you get the two-state solution. I don't think any other avenue exists. Therefore, I would suggest that everybody who agrees with that, contact us. We can deploy people into the UN, make phone calls to the different missions in the United Nations that they feel the pressure, but also, make phone calls to your congressman, to your city council, to your mayor. Make it felt that there is an absolute pressure, but let's do it in a coordinated way. So I would suggest that you really contact us and that we become civil rights, civil disobedience, direct political action, non-violent action, whatever. Dennis, you will find the right English word for me. But, get mobilized with us together. And preferably, we have Sunday evening in Europe today, Sunday afternoon in the United States. We have the whole Monday. If we would get all the people who are on this call in action tomorrow, and many of them have contacts, friends, or are part of an organization, those who have multipliers, if all of you would mobilize tomorrow and make such phone calls, it could be heard and the pressure would be felt, and it would all be channeled to the United Nations, because I think the fact that China is, for the remaining week until Thursday, the chair of the UN Security Council, I think that is a window of opportunity we should focus on.
Thank you very much, Helga, and we want to thank everybody. I don't know, Ray, do you have anything you'd like to say before we close out? You're good? All right. So yes, we're talking about creative, nonviolent, direct action. And there's a lot that one can do. The next meeting, by the way, of the International Peace Coalition will be on Friday. So for all of you all of you have never been involved in it, join that meeting. It's going to be an open public meeting. We still right now have over 225 people on. If we had that plus the people that have been on, we could have 400, 500 people in that meeting. Why that's relevant is that we can then compare notes and get some reports of what we will have done on Monday, on Tuesday, etc. That's the way that you begin to get something that has cohesion. It's not disparate. It's not just people generally out there, but a single movement. Yes, we may have differences, but we can pull together at this time for this action. And if we can do that, you can leverage that effect in ways which people would otherwise not believe possible. So we want to thank everybody for being with this meeting. Anastasia's not here. We're going to thank Anastasia Battle for what she did as the co-host. We're going to thank Humanity for Peace, of course, as a whole. And what we're going to do is we're going to play a version of something that we did. This was written by one of the Schiller Institute members, Bill Ferguson, and it is called Ceasefire Now. It's a video created by us, and that will bring us to our conclusion. Thank you all for being with us today.